Good afternoon. What a tremendous, beautiful show of support this afternoon for John. We all know he would be delightfully excited to see this many people he loved in one room. Thank you all on behalf of the family. I'm Heather Meyer. I am a friend of John's for a few years. I'm a performer as well, which is why I was asked to be the MC this afternoon. My personal experience with John was probably similar to many of you, full of exuberance, life, vitality, energy, wit, and puns beyond measure. Things that we all aspire to be in our own hearts and minds. For me, when I met John, I was working on an actor on one of his daughter's, Julia Carlis's shows, and I was dressed as a president, just a generic kind of Uncle Sam outfit at a fundraiser. He and I started talking, and he kept asking me what president I was, and I just named various presidents at that time. And he decided that that wasn't correct, and that I needed to be Walter Mondale, who, as we all know, never actually was president. But because of the Minnesota connection, he insisted that that's who I really was, and then proceeded to quiz me on Walter Mondale facts, of which I have very few. This continued every time I saw John, which is a few times a year. We would talk about Walter Mondale, various things that perhaps he might be doing. And as a cue from John, because I may not know any facts about Walter Mondale, I did not let a fact get in the way of a good story or opinion. And it was always just a joy to see him in the audience, at dinner, in various places, full of stories and life and joy. And I think, again, he'd be delighted to have you all in the room today. This afternoon, we have a beautiful afternoon of remembrances of John from a few people. I know all of us in this room have incredible remembrances of him, and if you want to share those, there is a website, johncarlis.com, set up. So if you would love to share them on there, that'd be beautiful for everyone and the family to have collected those, to be able to explore and experience everyone's story of John. Now we will have a few readers come up and share their remembrances.
Hi everyone, my name is Dan Keefe. My name is still Dan Keefe. Thank you to Rinda and the family for asking me to share a few remembrances of my best friend and colleague, John. So I wanted to honor John today by remembering his first rule of storytelling: never let any facts get in the way of a good story. So I've diligently removed all facts from this narrative. Like several of you that I see in the audience, I first met John when I came for an interview at the University of Minnesota. So for me, this was in 2008. And John approached me in that really kind of nervous period right before I was about to give a job talk. And the thing that was neat was, rather than grilling me on some computer science nuance, he said, "Hey, I heard you play basketball." You know? Which put me right at ease. That was quite nice. But then the next thing he did, he pulled 2 dimes out of his pocket. And he said, "What's this?" And many of you know what's coming. This is, of course, a there we have it. So shortly thereafter, it became really clear to me that John would nurture and guard like a hawk the culture of this special department of computer science and engineering that he had helped to build. And my time working together with John turned into something that, like that talk, was not so much about computer science, but rather about community, relationships with colleagues, students, staff, and families, and about principles, balance in life, the joyful struggle of academia, thinking like a visionary, and of course, noontime basketball. By the way, I think I may be the only professor to get tenure after nearly breaking his mentor's nose on the basketball court. Over the next years, John became a really dear friend to me and my family. My kids know him as the guy who tells the ballerina joke. What does a tall ballerina wear? A 3-3. And the kids have, of course, extended this. What does a really tall ballerina wear? A 4-4. What does a really, really tall ballerina wear? A 5-5. They could go on for hours. And in fact, they did many times on long car rides up to John and Rinda's cabin. Like many of you and many of your children, my son Aiden has a cherished wooden name, and my daughter Safi has a wooden staircase in her dollhouse. John used woodworking to connect people. Over the past 5 years, John has helped me live through the tragic death of my younger brother, also named John. He helped me to work, rest, and eventually refine joy and myself during this time. I think that one attribute that made this possible is that John was an amazing listener. He connected. In fact, he'd be able to go through this room right now and off the top of his head comment on a special ability that each of us has inside. He cherished and encouraged those abilities, and he could also identify our learning edges and push us to grow. John taught me how to stand up for myself. He taught me how to say no. He would say, Dan, you need to learn to say no more often. And then he'd add with a smile, to everyone but me. I want to share with those of you who know John as family, or as a teacher, or as friends, just a bit more about how much John meant to us professors as a mentor. John taught us. The culture and mentoring that John provided, in particular to the junior faculty, was so formative and so profoundly different than what I hear from my colleagues in other departments and at other universities. I count myself extremely fortunate to have had John as a mentor. We'll hear today a bit more about the impact he had on students. He was the best advocate for our students that we could possibly have. But this went beyond his own personal interactions with students and to the very culture and vision of our entire department. He worked tirelessly for decades to create a culture where our doors are always open to students and where junior faculty members and instructors have a trusted mentor. I don't know if I can really fully explain it. So for many of us, John taught us how to teach. He would show up multiple times a week at my office door with a smile. He'd have a joke or a cartoon I could use in my class, and a story from his teaching experience to get me through whatever I was struggling with at the time. He was really quite amazing. I mean, if he wanted to know how class was going, he wouldn't need to ask about the content at all. He would say, "Did you get the students talking today?" And this was just infectious. So everything that I did that is effective in the classroom is due to John. All the things that didn't work, those were my ideas. But when it worked, it really was because John taught me. He also taught me to have the confidence and vulnerability to connect with students at a holistic level, listening deeply to their life stories and responding to their current family, health, financial, or academic situations. A couple of times a month, I'd hear a story from John about a former student, sometimes from 20 years ago. Someone who just happened to stop in for a cup of coffee and a chat. And it's amazing to me how many of these stories involved some dramatic, transformative growth. One student may have been about to drop out of school, but then a conversation with John made the difference. Another may have been having trouble with an advisor. Sometimes that was me. Another may have struggled with a mental health problem and worked with John to establish a new routine and academic timeline. The list of former undergraduate students that John kept contact with, was 10 times longer than for anyone else. But the amazing thing was he not only set this example, he taught us how to follow it. In the last few weeks of his life, I was so fortunate to have a weekly art-making date with John. We did watercolor painting and woodblock printing, and we had a total blast. We soaked up every moment of it. So, in addition to a teacher, John was a constant learner. He created his first woodblock print just a few weeks ago. It was of a cabin, hidden deep in the woods, sunlight streaming through the trees onto the fresh snow. And I ask you to picture him there now. John Carlis left every room a happier place and made everyone around him a better person.
Hi everyone. I'm not gonna make it far without crying. Okay, thanks. You set me up. My name is Hannah, and I'm a PhD student at the University of Minnesota. John was my mentor and my friend. I didn't have him as a professor, nor was he my PhD advisor, and yet he was still a close and meaningful mentor in my life. I am just evidence of how willing and eager he was to help and support anyone who needed it. Whether it be a PhD, master's, or undergraduate student, faculty, industry professionals, rec center personnel, truly anybody. You know, he always talked about his set of wives. It's like there was a set of John Carlises, with n greater than 1, with the sheer number of people he taught, advised, mentored, coached, exercised, collaborated with, and befriended. But no, this set of one man touched this many lives. My relationship with John more or less started via chats in the hallway at school. I'm sure many of you can relate to having these hallway chats. They almost always started and ended with a pun, and almost never lasted less than half an hour. We would often chat about playing sports, and eventually he convinced me to come play racquetball with him. I showed up expecting to play and to get a good workout. After all, we joked that this would help me be in shape for my wedding. But what I didn't expect, but should have, given the length of my hallway chats, was how long we'd spend chatting in the rec center between games. I quickly learned that I needed to allot at least 2 hours for our racquetball chatting days. And in case you're wondering, I did get in shape for my wedding, because even though he was 70 and I'm relatively coordinated and athletic, he kicked my butt. And that's even with a special rule in my favor where he'd give up the serve after making a point. But as we agreed at the start of every single game, no mercy. A few months ago, John emailed me to schedule a racquetball match. Now, this was not uncommon, but the timing was impeccable.
I replied that I wouldn't be able to because I was about to leave my house to drive to my first on-campus interview for a faculty position. I also mentioned to him that I was completely freaking out. He replied back immediately, "Ah, grasshopper, must find stillness in the whirlwind," and told me to call him right away. I called him, and he followed up with a slew of emails, and he coached me and supported me through my first on-campus interview. A few weeks ago, John was in the hospital for a treatment, and I had emailed him that I wanted to visit, but I was busy preparing for my thesis proposal exam that week. Once again, he emailed right back and put my mind at ease, saying, "No guilt, grasshopper," and proceeded to provide a short, perfect list of last-minute preparation advice, ending, of course, with a reminder of his token take on graduate school, to enjoy the joyful struggle. The morning of my exam, while he was still in the hospital, he sent another email. "Break a leg." 3 words, perfect timing, exactly what I needed. It's simply extraordinary to reflect on just how giving and supportive he was, and how good he was at it. To be exactly what I needed in those moments, and I'm just one of the so many that he was this person for. Recently, John and I had been talking about teaching, and he lent me this book that he said changed his life as a teacher. So I have this, stolen from Carlis. He actually did officially give it to me, but as he would say, never let the details get in the way of a good story. He told me that he measured his teaching by the sum total of desired change of each individual student. At the time, we were just talking and thinking about teaching. Now I realize that if life is measured that way, by the sum total of influence you've had on individual people in your life, then John lived the fullest life possible. John would tell me, as I'm sure he told many of you, that he loved connecting with people. But not only that, he also loved connecting those people with other people. He wasn't just networking for himself, he was surrounding himself with good people and hoping that these people would also be good for the others he knew. Among his network were a number of women who he especially cared for and supported and mentored in various ways, women whom he thought were special. John started introducing and connecting us over email and in person. Now we all intend to honor him by getting together on a regular basis. We're all sure he'd be so happy seeing us all connect and supporting each other, as he always hoped and intended. And if there's others out there we're missing, we're happy to have you join us. When I first heard the news about John, I, and I'm sure many of you, felt flustered and shocked. It's a true loss. But I was almost immediately comforted as I thought what he would say. "Be calm. Grasshopper must find stillness in the whirlwind." May we remember him every time we look at a painting he gave us, or your name or your child's name in wood. And may we honor him by passing on what he passed on to us, whether it be sage advice or a really bad pun. We'll miss him, but I take comfort in thinking how heaven is now enjoying his company, surely now graced with an abundance of chuckles and eye rolls. Ironically and beautifully, I realize that remembering and coping is a joyful struggle.
So I am not Nelson. I am Chris McCallicker. I'm a cousin of John's. But Nelson was U of M colleague and basketball buddy of John's, and wrote down some words, and I'll see if I can do them justice today. All right, so we'll start off with a couple of Johnisms. There was an explosion at the cheese factory. Debris was everywhere. I think the back just got it. Did you know that a famous French dictator was actually killed in a kitchen explosion? Linoleum blown apart. That one's a little bit, groans. That one's a little bit more heavy-handed. So these were just two of the at least 1,000 corny jokes that John told me almost every day. Of course, all of you who knew John know that he loved telling corny jokes. It wasn't so much that he loved telling them. I disagree with Nelson there. What he loved was seeing the reaction of the recipient. He would wait there expectantly, waiting for the eye roll, or the groan, or the laugh, or the just complete ignorance of what was going on. So I knew John for over 30 years. We were colleagues at the University of Minnesota, but mostly we played basketball together several times a week over those many years. We were kindred spirits in basketball, not just that we were about the only two old farts who continued to play against all the youngsters who were 1/3 our age, but also because we both knew and loved the game. John loved basketball so much that despite multiple knee surgeries and advice from his orthopedic surgeon, he continued to play right up until about a month ago. John was a basketball guru. He knew and executed the basic skills to a degree that would have made John Wooden proud. Although he was only about 5'7", he always wanted to guard the biggest guy on the court. With a huge smile on his face, he would say to me, "Nels, get me the ball. I have fresh meat." I would say that I only fell for this once. Meaning that while the naive big guys would think they could easily block his shot, John would unveil his infamous underhanded scoop shot, and it worked every time. John was an outstanding scholar in every sense of the word. He was truly an excellent teacher. He really loved teaching, and it showed. He was great. He even took on extra teaching loads and openly shared his excellent pedagogical strategies with everyone. Once, I was quite flattered when Carol Chomsky of the Provost's office called me and informed me that I had been selected as a distinguished Bush faculty mentor. It turned out that John had nominated me, he himself having done that for several years. John was also a fantastic researcher. Of course, he was a full professor and truly outstanding in his own field of computer science, with many impressive research accomplishments. But he also was a collaborator and contributor to other areas of research such as neuroscience and HIV research, and with our own cancer team. We had known each other for many years when one day in the locker room, probably when we were both standing there stark naked, John overheard me talking about cancer research, and he piped up, "Nels, you do know that what I do is design sophisticated computer analysis for big data." Sure enough, owing largely to John's expertise and contributions, our research group soon had 3 or 4 NIH grants and about 20 scientific papers, such as this one, a catalog of human saliva proteins identified by free-flow electrophoresis-based peptide separation and tandem mass spectrometry, published in Molecular and Cellular Proteomics. Well, enough about all the university contributions. Of course, as you all know, John was much, much more. A wonderful family man, husband, father, grandpa, son, brother, uncle. Rarely was I ever with him that he didn't tell me something about Rinda and his family. I was fortunate to witness that firsthand a few times. He was a Renaissance man. Of course, he was a talented artist. Who could ever forget the frog? Enviably, he wrote and illustrated a children's book for Silas. I also saw the puzzles and games that he made by hand, and of course, he did a lot of the work on the cabin up in Two Harbors. I also attended one of the chorales that he sang in a few years ago. So, in summary, as all you know, of course, John was a great guy. I consider myself to be fortunate and a better person to have known him and to call him my good friend all these many years. I really miss him, and I'm certain that I will for a long, long time. Memories are timeless treasures of our hearts. Sometimes you may never know the true value of a moment until it becomes a memory. The wisdom of Dr. Seuss.
I'd have to lower this more. So going last, there's some lines that are going to be repeated, but all of us have heard all of my dad's lines more than once, so maybe that's fitting. In my dad's final hours in the hospital, we spent a lot of time reflecting on him as a person and his role in our lives. We wrote this letter to read to him, and I will always be grateful we had that chance to say goodbye before letting him go. Dear Dad, we will remember you. Smiling, laughing, reading, coming home with a never-ending stream of library books, buying books just to lend them out and always writing stolen from Carlis in them, doing voices, all the voices when reading to kids, taking sudden naps and blaming it on the nap dragon, telling jokes and making puns, entertaining all the kids with juggling oranges or bocce balls, cheek popping, telling repeating stories that would loop back on themselves and continue on forever, horsing around, making thrones out of pillows and blankets, going for a ride in the wiggle car, which was probably kind of dangerous in a real car, bouncing us on the bed, making trains out of boxes, the pick-a-finger game, making us do dog tricks, having a helium tank and giving helium balloons to all the neighbor kids, throwing a decoy snowball in the air and then nailing someone with the second snowball, and many other signature dad tricks and games. Singing lullabies, chanting sea shanties, carols and not carols on the steps at Christmas morning, changing the words to songs like Ognib instead of bingo or Quaaludes instead of Hey Jude, playing cards and making up nicknames and acronyms for the score sheet, never letting us win at games when we were kids, but instead teaching us how to improve, explaining your thinking when teaching us a skill, especially driving. I think of things he says when I drive all the time. Teaching navigation by handing us the map and then taking a random turn. Oh gosh, I lost it. Asking real questions and having real conversations. Always interested in new ideas, especially about teaching, learning, and writing. Proud of mentoring women, students, and faculty of color and anyone who needed extra support. Having unapologetic outrage at the political right. Having no use for organized religion. Overcoming decades of struggling with visual art to later enjoy experimenting. Gloria, do you want to come up here? Okay. Experimenting with painting. Loving mountains, oceans, and appreciating the majesty of nature. Loving fires, rain, storms, and wind. Proud of all the work you guys did at the cabin. Taking down trees, including almost hitting Bill. Making names. Actually. It was a graze. Yeah. Making names, fixing things, always being active, basketball, biking, and almost any sport or activity. Playing catch and doing frisbee tricks. Never letting facts get in the way of a good story. Watching any sports game at any level and saying when these two teams get together, anything can and usually does happen. Building Legos with Silas. It's okay. Building, we're talking about Grandpa. I'm almost done. Being Mr. Mellow and Mr. Subtle. Yeah. Wanting to be friends with our friends. Valuing young people. Always volunteering to help with house projects or car trouble, always having advice, including always bring a swimsuit and always do dishes at someone else's house, identifying home runs by the crack of the bat, sharing your love of good hot pretzels, wearing your Sweeney shirt, making omelets on Christmas, requiring everyone present to put on all their new Christmas clothes on at the same time, no matter how much you got, putting ice in your wine, white or red, making sandcastles and jumping in waves, making sledding runs in the backyard like the famous oscillator, insisting we rent a convertible to drive around Mount Rainier and look up at the trees, even though it's probably 40 degrees out. Jumping in puddles, dancing in the rain, the living room, every wedding reception, or any other opportunity. And probably hundreds of other ways that made you uniquely you. And anyone who knows me and Julia knows how many of these things live on in our lives too. And it's hard to know that Silas and Gloria and all the rest of us won't have more years with you, but we will keep telling your stories and sharing our memories, and you will live on in our hearts. We love you, Dad.
Well, thank you to all of our readers. I think John would approve if we all gave them all a round of applause. Next we have a reading from a novel by a Wisconsin author named Patrick Rothfuss, read by Victoria Payan.
In the Name of the Wind. In the evening, when the sun is setting fast, I'll watch you from high above. The time for your return is long since past, but mine is ever faithful love. In evening, when the light is dying, my feet at last are homeward turning. The wind is through the willows sighing, please keep the hearth fire burning.
And as our final piece, we have Laura again playing one more beautiful piece of music for us. And please give it up for Laura. Everyone is invited to enjoy refreshments in the reception room. Feel free, there are millions of John stories to share with each other and jokes to exploit as well. And remember with refreshments, as John would say, condiments are for the weak. Thank you all so much.
It's great that you videoed those stories. Were awesome.
I love the letter they wrote.
Yeah, that's great.
It makes me wonder what I've been doing with my life.
I was thinking the same thing reading through me. I wasn't that, never that fun.
Great guys.
Oh, I think yes. I was on and I thought maybe I was supposed to really see. But you know what I mean?